So far we've been laying out the basic foundation of JavaScript and how to start working and start coming up with that logic that you want applied. So you actually want something to happen. You don't want to just put a bunch of values in and then pull those same values out. You can do that within HTML. So that's not exactly what we're going to be using JavaScript for. And this is the part where things start getting interesting. So we had introduced functions, and with functions you can do a lot of really cool things with functions. So one of them, so we're going to keep this code as it is, and one of them with functions is they have the ability to create their own local scope, so local value. So if I was to do something like var apple AB within here, and then I'm doing this out here. So what do you think is actually going to get displayed in the console log? If we notice here, we're hitting the console log twice, once from invoking this function, it's going to run through here, and the second time it's just a general console log of the apple AB variable. So what do you think is going to get put out into the console log, and in what order is it going to get presented? So do you think it's just going to say, I'm going to rename this to first apple. So do you think it's going to say first apple, first apple, first apple, new apple, new apple, new apple, error? What do you think the combination is going to be? So when I refresh it, it says new apple, first apple. And I'm going to run through why this is. So we notice that we've applied first apple over here and new apple within the function. And this is what's called local scope, because we only have access to this apple AB value within the local scope. And that's locally within this function itself. So when I call to my function, when I trigger that to run, it runs function, it sees, okay, apple AB is now contains a value of new apple, and this is a brand new variable that's being identified here, brand new string. And when it console logs that out, it's going to take this brand new one, because this is happening locally. If this is not available, then it's going to look for any global values of apple AB, and then it will return first apple. Whereas over here, it's completely unaware of what's happened within this function, because this is all working locally, and it has no idea that I'm looking for apple AB that's available within the function, and it's only aware of apple AB that was declared here right in the beginning, and this is what's known as a global value. So some of the things that you can do with functions, there's quite a lot more actually we can do with functions. We can do things like we can pass arguments, we can pass multiple arguments, and I'll just show you how that works. So if I had something like a value of 4 and a value of 5, and I'm also going to put a string in there. So I'm going to put ABC. This is actually going to give me access to ABC. So I'm going to concatenate it together, put some spacing in there, and show you the value of A, and copy this out. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. Should have copied that plus sign as well, and plus C. So this will write out all of these values. So what do you think is going to happen here when we console log this value out? It's going to take in these arguments. It looks like I'm kind of assigning these values to there. So what do you think we're going to be presented with in the console? When I refresh it, we see that we've got first apple. So this is that apple AB value, and then A, B, and C. And those are the values that we've passed in from the my function. So this can actually be entirely different if I have something like 14, and okay, I'm getting lazy here, but just running through the values, and I'm going to just put something like new, and going back out, refreshing it, and we see that this old function actually does something entirely different. It returns an entirely different set of values. So now we can begin to see that we're getting this something dynamic happening here, and I can even go as far as declaring a brand new value of D here and doing something like A plus B. And instead of having A plus B, so maybe we could turn this into a mathematical formula and just completely disregard C and change it to D. So what do you think is going to happen here? And I'm going to get rid of this one as well because we don't need to illustrate that anymore. So what do you think is going to show up in the console log now? And comment that out as well. So another thing that we don't need. So here we have our mathematical worked out. So 4 plus 5 equals 9, 14 plus 25 equals 39. So really cool what we can do with these functions. And so additionally, I'm going to create a brand new function, totally different function, call it function A. I'm going to comment all of this out. And now I'm going to call to the function. But this time, I'm going to actually invoke something completely different here, which is going to be really interesting because I'm just going to do something called return. So I'm going to be returning a value over to this function. So what do you think is going to happen here when I do 14 plus or 1425 new? So these values are going to get passed in here, and it says it's returning D. So what does that mean? When we go out here, so what do you think is going to show up in the console here on that return? And if you said nothing, you're correct, because we're not actually outputting this returned value. So in order to output it, we're going to go back to our handy console log, remove that second quote there. Not sure why I didn't copy all of it in there, but console log. And now, because we're actually writing it out into the console, when I refresh it, I see that I get this value of 39. So this is a calculated value of whatever values are coming in here. So what if I was to take this one step further and I did something like f equals 14 and variable g equals 25, and instead of passing the values in here, I did f and I did g. And I'm actually going to get rid of this new because we completely don't need it. So now I hope you're seeing that we've got this dynamic thing happening where we're not predefining the values there, we're defining them up here, and this gives us the ability to actually work with these values. So what I can do now is I can even increment f. I can increment g, and these are just adding 1 to it. And I'm going to just write this out a whole bunch of times. So do you think that I'm going to see the same value 6 times? Do you think I'm going to see something different? When I refresh it, we see that it's actually adding those values. So there's no numbers that equal 49 together, but when we look back on our code, that f and g keep increasing every time we call a function. So f is no longer equal to 14, it would be equal to 19, I believe, because we've hit it 5 times, and then the next time we're running through. Because we're passing f and g in here, even though it increments here, we haven't taken that increment in the values that we're passing. So it's taking the initial values that's got stored in the memory for f and g and passing them over, reading them as a and b, and then f and g are actually increasing, but we've still got those old values for a and b. So when we pass this in, f has a value of 19 and g has a value of 30, so together they're going to equal 49. So this does take some time to kind of get your head around and how this is all working within the functions, and this is the beginning of creating some dynamic functionality with JavaScript. So I do encourage you to take a look through the source, update some of the functions, try it out for yourself, see what you can make it do, see what calculations you can make it do, and really get a feel and a hang for how to use functions within JavaScript, because these are going to be a really important, integral part of understanding how to use JavaScript effectively. So coming up, we're going to dive even deeper into the cool dynamic functionality and the dynamic functional world of JavaScript with some really neat things and adding additional options for applying logic within our code, updating these variables, and so on. So that's all coming up in the next lessons.